What ends up happening is that every year in November, for November 1, uh, the they have to go before Parliament to announce what the immigration levels is going to be. Now, there's actually at least three things that they're bringing before Parliament. First is what transpired usually in prior to that, usually in this case it would be 2019, as well as what happened in 2020. Also, they also have to indicate the number of temporary resident permits that were issued, which is about 6,000. And those are for, the reason why they report that to Parliament is those individuals were inadmissible to Canada for a number of reasons, but were granted these temporary resident permits to facilitate their entry. The most important aspect, though, is the announcement of what the level will be for the following year, or whether they table, as they did this year, a multi-level plan. And so what we're seeing is they've revised their previous multi-level plan into this current plan, where they have indicated that from 2021 to 2023, they're hopeful of being able to relocate at least 1.2 million immigrants to Canada.
Yes, and we have seen a lot of headlines mentioning this, and also some critique from the Conservative Parliament about the numbers being quite high and difficult to attain. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, one of the aspects of these national levels that hasn't been really discussed is that, yes, they're setting at the higher end, the high range. They have increased the high range. However, for these national levels, what you have to always understand is that we're actually are probably taking a look at three numbers. The previous numbers, which were set at 351,000 for 2021, 361,000 for 2022. So let's take a look at 2021. So when we take a look at the levels plan, they've indicated that the high range is to be 410. They also do give themselves a low range as well, and that's set at 300,000, which is actually lower than what had been proposed at the 351,000. So what they are doing is they're providing themselves with a range. The reason why they do that is that they're also trying to factor in their capacity, the demand, plus other factors such as we also have to take a look at COVID-19 and its impact on our immigration levels as well. If you were to take a look at 2021, we are seeing that the government was only able to produce about half of, about 50% of what their target was. So that's also part of going into this levels, is for them to also make up for the shortfall for 2020 as well. So you also have to factor that in regards to it. So they're trying to play catch up in regards to the numbers. They recognize that there is a greater need and that especially with economic migrants coming into Canada, and they see it as trying to kickstart the Canadian economy with COVID-19 as well, because there are still, even though we have a high unemployment rate, we are still seeing shortfalls, especially in a number of industries, whether it's in the agricultural industry, whether it's in the tech industry, or in the business immigration as well.
Absolutely, thank you. And so the press release does include several highlights of the plan. Why don't we chat about those?
Thank you. So the first one is the increase of admissions over the 3 years, and they actually say it is to make up the shortfall for 2020. That also being said, the government has been looking forward to this to see what the demand is for workers in Canada or permanent residents moving forward, and there has been a desire to increase that number. I usually say what's I've said what's new is old and what's old is new previously, because one of the aspects that's interesting in this is that part of the Liberal platform for a number of years has been the goal of having 1% immigration levels. And so previously, it's always been a little bit below the 1%. And so actually they have now adopted, they're now with this plan, actually adopting that plan. They're focusing on, as I said, in this immigration level, they're focusing on economic growth, and about 60% of the admissions are to come from the economic class. And I'll have to say that's pretty much been standard, that you've usually seen anywhere about 60% being from the economic class. We also have the corresponding, I'll say, in immigration, there's sort of three aspects when we take a look at immigration. One is economic class, which is based on the person's employment or business coming into Canada. The second tranche, or the second class that we take a look at, is usually family class, which are family reunification. And we've recently seen announcements in regards to the parents and grandparents class. We've also seen an announcement for the remainder of this year for them to sort of triage the backlog that has been with spouse and common law partners, whether outside or inside Canada, to reunify those. And we're also seeing the third tranche, or the third group, will deal with refugees. And I'll come back to that a little bit later, because this plan also introduces some new items there that are interesting, that the press haven't been talking about. So the third highlight is they've talked about a continued focus on innovative and community-driven approaches to address diverse labor and demographic needs across Canada. Wow, that's quite a mouthful. And what I'll say with that is, what we have seen over the last few years is we've seen the government introduce the Rural and Northern Initiative Program. We've seen them initiate the Atlantic Initiative Program. But what we've seen is that within immigration, you have the federal part of the program. We've seen them in the economic program have the provinces how can I say, assigned or provided targets for the provinces themselves to be able to deal with the numbers coming into the province and who they're selecting in the economic classes. But that's also further evolved or transitioned, where we have seen both the feds and the provinces transition or move the ball sort of down the field by going to municipalities and communities to say, who is it that you really need, and we want you to have a role in this. So we're seeing communities also becoming greater involved in this in regards to the selection of immigrants going into their communities. In regards to a renewed commitment to capacity building and digital transformation in Canada's immigration, I'll stop there. Capacity, basically to be able to produce numbers, and digital translation online, but not only online, but using technology to assist them. We're seeing potential use of artificial intelligence. We're seeing the use of barcodes on forms to be able to transition a case as quickly as possible from the paper element, or even leaving the paper element totally behind, such that they're dealing with being able to have a system that is able to get a file created as quickly as possible, as well as to increase the numbers as well. And this is to support their operations, but also to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on the processing of applications. When we talk about that, I would say one of the aspects that I'll say that will happen, or have happened with COVID, that has really made the case, is very similar to us being online with this Zoom meeting. It is also to move faster and to take the applications out of a paper-based system and more online. And that is the goal, such that persons, when they're creating their profiles and they're actually creating a profile and their file for themselves, such that there will be less of a need as we move forward in regards to I'll say filling in forms, signing them, and sending them in paper-wise. One of the aspects that was impacted at this time or during the last 6 months that we saw, in particular with the family class category, was most of those applications are a paper-based application. And so we actually saw a backlog or an inventory develop because as offices weren't open or the persons weren't in the mailroom to actually take it from a physical file and create it, they're going to have to take a look at moving it out of a paper-based system eventually. We've been promised that for a number of years, but I think actually what will happen with COVID is it is going to hasten the need for this movement to move everything online, so it gives a greater capacity for them to be greater numbers, as well as potentially faster processing. What stymied them at this time is when you saw whether it was in the Atlantic provinces or it was in Ontario or Alberta, in regards to the provincial restrictions on persons working in an office. You have to understand that a lot of the case processing centers had a couple hundred people working in those offices, and then with those provincial guidelines, they're now working at home. So they're trying to take they were trying to take everything online, but still not actually having access to some of the paper applications to be able to actually sort of translate it from that paper file to the actual online application.
It sounds like this point about technology is all about building greater efficiency in the process.
That's exactly what it is. Now, for a while, one of the sort of flagship programs at ICCRC has been something called the Francophone Mobility Program. And so in the highlight, it talks about additional points for French-speaking candidates under the Express Entry, which is their online system for the economic, to promote the growth of Francophone communities outside of Quebec. Now, what happens within Canada is Quebec is unique. It selects its own immigrants into the province of Quebec, and most of those are going to be economic, but they also are also involved with a refugee and family class as well. But that being said, their primary concern is going to be on economic. The Canadian government for a number of years has had a program of trying to increase the number of French-speaking candidates outside the province of Quebec with this Francophone Mobility Program. So what they're going to do with this is they're giving them additional points under what we'll call, as part of the Express Entry system, there's something called a comprehensive ranking system. And so within that initial comprehensive ranking system, they're going to provide additional points for those persons with French-speaking ability. So that goes hand in hand with the Francophone program and their commitment to raise the numbers for French-speaking individuals outside of the province of Quebec. One of the unique aspects is something that's very new under the next highlight. It says a commitment to add 500 refugees over the next 2 years, I should say, through the Economic Mobility Pathways Project. And they go, an innovative approach that helps qualified refugees apply for permanent residence through existing economic immigration pathways. So what they've introduced here that nobody is talking about yet is a hybrid that is, as I said, we usually had 3 separate classes where you had refugees, where you had family class, and you had economic. Here's something that's new. It's a hybrid where they're saying they're taking a look at individuals that are refugees, But the other aspect is they're going to be processing it through the express entry and the economic categories to allow for it. Now, if you're to drill down on this, you're seeing that they're taking a look at journalists, they're taking a look at human rights activists, they're taking a look at individuals that are involved in democratic movements around the world that may find themselves in a refugee situation. I'll say this is a seed that's being planted now. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens on the world stage in regards to this, because this program could eventually extend beyond the 500. When I take a look at it, it's a very creative approach to it. It's not identifying by country or by situation, or I should say by naming a certain country's situation. It's open to identify individuals that are both refugees, but also have the economic skill set to be able to come here. It was very interesting because what did happen in 2020, or what we've seen happen in 2020, that nobody has really addressed in regards to this, is that back in March and April, we were starting to see in regards to an evolving situation in Hong Kong as well. And so to me, a number of individuals in the immigration field were talking to the Canadian government to say, well, how can we process these individuals if they're in the geographic jurisdiction. Most refugees are outside of their they've fled that situation. And so I'd say this is the seed that they're possibly planting in regards to be able to deal with that situation. So that's quite exciting. It's a low number at the present time, but it's also, that situation is going to have to bear watching to see whether or not we do see an increased need in regards to this.
Absolutely. It'll be fascinating to see where this program goes.
Yep. We've also seen during the pandemic, the last highlight is a pathway to permanent residence for eligible asylum seekers who were working in the front lines of the pandemic between March 13th and August 14th, providing direct care to patients in healthcare institutions. So what we saw, if you were to take a look, especially out of Quebec in particular, we saw a number of asylum seekers who had, and we do presently have a backlog of asylum seekers in Canada through the Safe Third designation. We probably have over 60,000 of them. But we also saw the jobs that they were primarily doing, or a number of them did, is some of them had skill sets that they were nurses and that they were assisting in the long-term care facilities. And we've seen the lobbying for this across Canada to say, if we had individuals that were asylum seekers within Canada and they did provide direct care, then there's another pathway for them other than just their asylum. Let's say that they become a failed asylum seeker, but they've already given themselves to providing care in the long-term care facilities. So the government, the federal government, has recognized this to say there are individuals that they put themselves on the front line, and as such, whether their refugee claim is processed in a positive or negative way, this is another way for them to be able to secure permanent residence. So that sort of hits the highlights of this. So we're talking about the range or the ranges. We're talking about some new initiatives as well. And I think that what we are going to see as we move forward and as we're dealing with COVID-19 is that we are presently seeing reactions to COVID-19 with public policy, and we're going to, my prediction we're also going to see further developments policy-wise in regards to our economic programs, especially in moving forward. And partially in reaction to whatever essential travel provisions that there are. We have to understand that with the COVID-19 travel restrictions, that is one thing that could limit the numbers, and that's why we have those ranges built in. As I said, for this year, we've seen a 50% reduction in the number of persons gaining access to permanent residence here. That being said, we have a demand within Canada in regards to international students and workers that are already here, that we have to also provide them with avenues as well as bringing in, as I say, new immigrants from overseas. But our numbers will be restricted by what are the travel restrictions out of those countries. We've seen borders closed, not only here in Canada, between Canada and the US for everything except for essential travel, but we've also seen other countries shutting down their borders and whatnot. So it's very nice if we select somebody for immigration to Canada, but if they can't if they can't do the travel from there to here to gain the landing, that also presents problems in our system. And that's why they have built in these high and low levels. And as I said, I think that we're going to see further public policy initiatives coming forward as we move forward and as we sort it out with COVID-19 and its restrictions.
Thank you so much, Ron. I really appreciate the nuanced perspective that you've given us about the various levels and as well as these 7 highlight points. One last question for you. What does this press release mean for current immigration consultants or folks who are looking to get into the field over the next 3 years?
What it means over the next 3 years is it's showing this is something that a number of consultants have been waiting for a number of years, as we've seen the aging population, as we've seen time extend, that we've been expecting a look to the future and to our needs with permanent residents coming in. I'll have to say this, I guess I've been around so long. As I said, I've been doing immigration for 30 years, and I sort of remember my old physics classes where we used to have the waves and the trough, and I've been through a number of those where, you know, if you're in the peak or the valley. And so what ends up happening is I'd say what we're about to see is, in moving forward, the government is actually saying there is a need and we have to sort of ramp up in regards to younger immigrants coming here, who will provide a kickstart to the economy or to assist with the economy, or even business immigrants coming here to provide employment opportunities for Canadians. And what's happened is, with COVID, we're seeing an unemployment rate, but we're also seeing some of the engines in a lot of the provinces have been related to either some of their entrepreneur programs or self-employed programs in developing businesses and being able to get started. It's going to be very interesting. I think that the future is right now. I'll say this year in 2020, we were in very much a trough. As I said, only 50% of the individuals were able to get here. The other aspect is that we are still seeing travel restrictions. But over the next 3 years, what the hope for the future is that we'll eventually, hopefully, COVID-19 may be with us for a number of years yet, but we'll start to see travel restrictions being reduced, potential vaccine, and moving forward, the economy took a back step in 2020, and this is to say to the future, let's sort of kickstart it moving forward so that we are in that peak. So right now, it's an issue with immigration consultants in the field, because if you're only seeing 50% output, that's hard on both immigration lawyers and immigration consultants. But this is sort of a message. This message at this time is a message for the future, to say everybody has to see that there is a need in moving forward.